So this is a new purchase of mine. The game is called Galactic Destiny. I'm not absolutely certain that it's a full game in the sense that, like something I once saw called Popes and Princes, it feels as though it hasn't been completely designed. It's in a better state than Popes and Princes was, and component-wise it's really actually quite nice. But reading the rules, I don't feel like I have a tremendous confidence that I've got enough rules to play the game. However, there are a lot of cards in it, so maybe like a game like Magic, it could be more dominated by what's on the cards. Looking at the components, first of all, there's the map, which is absolutely gorgeous. These plastic pieces, which are a little crowded, especially over here in the home province, the first province, those are the Republic's fleet. The premise of the game is almost a Star Wars-ish type feel. Star Wars not in the sense that, looking for freedom in the galaxy here, which I know is in here somewhere, but it's not in that sense, which was really based on the first movie and the feel there, but more on the later Star Wars movies, where the second series, or the earlier ones, depending on how you want to look at this. But anyway, more on that, where there's this Galactic Federation, which is being tainted by a really corrupt evil. And that's kind of the spirit here. Now, each of the players is a political party that is, at least in theory, not evil. But there's the opportunity to be very evil within it. If evil ends up winning, which is by these counters, infestation counters, which mark provinces that have become totally succumbed to evil, and that's by 10 of those 10 of these provinces, and the provinces are largely these kind of spaces on a radial, but it's actually kind of a spiral cut with radials, and then there's these kind of outer sectors, and then this weird little thing here. And none of that matters. The terrain is almost unimportant. What does matter is the little numbers and symbols that are within each province. Some of the provinces are a little crowded, and that's a shame for gameplay because there's no real design reason that they had to be built, crowded together in that spiral the way they are. However, aesthetically, it kind of makes sense that the center of the galaxy would be denser than these spiral arms and maybe this little outpost outside the galactic main spiral. Anyhow, again, that's more of a thematic aspect because when it comes down to it, the board is just there to mark the numbers and where the fleets are. Adjacency matters in some actions, however, so there is some terrain consideration there. But the layout, I think, is primarily for aesthetics. So this corruption power will defeat all the players if they get 10 provinces. On the alternate side, the players can win one of two ways, either by completely controlling the government, and that's all these offices here, and in a lot of senses, it kind of feels a little bit touched by, say, Republic of Rome, in this kind of, there's a political means of victory. There's also, though, a military, or not really military, but you can gain control if you manage to gain control of 10 sectors with your party, and that's what each player is playing, a political party in this federation. If you get 10 of the sectors yourself, as opposed to the corruption getting them, then you can also win. So there's two routes for the players to win, and one route for them to lose. The problem is, evil is seductive. Okay, so, and we've got this rules summary here, which I haven't really looked at too carefully, but it actually seems to be pretty good. The backside is some artwork, but and the artwork to the game, unfortunately for me, I'm not a fan of it, but it reminds me a little of the old heavy metal magazines, which I guess are still in production. Some of the feel of that, it's kind of cool, but I find it a little busier than I like. Okay, and we can go into what the different symbols mean, but we have a lot of different decks of cards here, which are going to come into play too. So one of the things is each player starts out with a randomly assigned party, and in that party they have a sector, and a number of the sectors, these are marked with a gold number on them like this, and all of the starting players' sectors have some special ability listed. So for example, this one, you may re-roll one die each turn and choose the better result. That's kind of cool, you know. And then there's a discussion of why that's applicable to that particular race or party. On your party's first invasion each turn, you gain no corruption. Whatever. They each have sort of a special ability, but that ability is linked to the sector, which means if you lose that sector somehow, you end up having to give that card back. There are also cards for some of the additional sectors here, and some of the inner ones have these special abilities. No outer ones beyond the parties have them. And these are, I guess, kind of bonus places to capture because of it. And these are then duplicated over here as kind of a play aid in case, I don't know, you don't want to reach over and get the card and you're facing the right direction near that. It's a big board. The game has a big footprint, so there might be a difficulty in collecting all the information. The same kind of difficulty that I had in Twilight Imperium, I think I'm going to have here. It's a shame because this, in spirit, looks like very much my kind of game. The political conflict, a little bit of military involved in it, but the game may be a little too light. Alright, let's look at some of the other cards. Each player also starts off with a senator, which is associated with their faction, and they have some numbers on them. Military ability up in red, political or diplomatic ability in blue, a cost to purchase, and a party affiliation. And the party affiliation, actually that's over here, this is to indicate that it's a home guy. The party affiliation means that if you're that party, you can pay less to get control of the senator. Now you start with this one face up, your home senator, and then a racial affiliation. And those link to things in the sectors. The sectors also have green, which is the money symbol, and you've got little tracks for money and influence on your card. Most of the rest, some of it's flavor, and then there's some informational player aid stuff that's the same for everyone, I think. I hope. Okay, so, but what's on here is the money that you collect from a sector is written there, and then the amount of influence that you collect from a sector. And you get those each turn for the sectors you control. Makes sense there. Now, over here is the general defensive value of the sector, and those inner ones have very high numbers there. It looks like some of these also have big numbers and are kind of tougher to get and with high value as well. Unlike these guys who have special abilities at the lower number sectors. These guys don't have special abilities, but they have very, very high income. Not a lot of influence. Again, kind of a lot of flavor and a lot of interest in the disparity of the areas in the game. Okay, how does the game work? Well, darned if I really know. Other things you have these action cards, and you're dealt a hand of 3 of these, and again, they have a red number, which is their initiative value. The lower those are, the earlier you can go with a card. So if you play a card with, say, a 5, which is about as high as it goes, someone else can play a lower numbered card and kind of interrupt you with that. They have a time that you're allowed to play them. For example, this is played in the Intrigue Phase, and whether or not it costs one of your senators an action. Now, senators have an action kind of like in Magic where they're tapped to do something, and they're tapped in that manner if they're an admiral of a fleet leading an attack or a defense, or if they're leading a campaign, or if they're needed to trigger either their special ability or one of these action cards. There's a cost to perform the action, which is paid in money. And again, you get some of that each turn. And then the actual effect of the action is written on the card. This one, target another player, pay some money, name a card. If they have it, they have to discard it. Alternatively, you can just point to a card in their hand and make them discard it, which is probably the stronger ability unless you got some reason that you can have looked at or known what's in their hand. Other things that there are, well, there's sector cards, and 3 of these get turned up each turn to indicate which sectors are open to political campaigning for that turn. Political campaigning is the legal way to gain control of sectors. You can gain control of sectors in illegal ways as well by militarily invading them. You also might be able to campaign in a sector illegally in order to try to sway its vote. That I'm not so sure about, but I know in Rebellion you can do that. Speaking of which, there's a card. One player can go into Rebellion, and it's got some disadvantages and advantages. The disadvantage is when you declare Rebellion, most of your sectors will probably defect. You're allowed to pick one sector which won't, and you roll a handful of dice. You roll a die for each other sector that you own, and you get to keep it only on a 6 in general. So if you're doing well, you don't want to do the Rebellion, but if you're down to one sector, it may be a good idea, and it has a number of benefits, some of which are you can break the law without becoming corrupt. We have event cards. 3 of these come out each turn, and I have no idea what they actually do, but they have kind of broad-ranging effects either on specific parties, sectors, whatever, and we'll see them as they come out because I'm going to, of course, do the whole playthrough. We have a senator deck, which you put new senators into your hand. Once they're in your hand, you can then buy them, so you get a draw of them every turn, and then the ability to expand your faction by paying for them. They cost money again, which is listed over here, like I said. You start with 1 extra face-down senator from that deck. Let's see what else. I think I mentioned the action cards. Yeah, you have a handful of those at the beginning, and you get a couple more each turn. You have the political offices, which each have their own special ability, and those are triggered in much the same way that the sector abilities are. I'm not sure how they work out and which are better and which not. You're going to have to watch the play or maybe come to my review to get an idea how this all went. Lots of complex little components that, from the point of view of the new player, you have no idea after reading the rules exactly what you're going to be able to do or not. And there's some hints like there's an assassination action. And if you look at some of the senators, you'll notice most of the non-starting senators are a little more interesting. So this guy has a 1 military, but has a 3 diplomacy. Also has a higher cost, and has an ability, Master Assassin, as an action. You can do an assassination as if they had played the card. Well, I don't have that card in my hand, so I don't know what it does. And that's kind of annoying. There's no cheat sheet to match to these. Hopefully those cards will be pretty common, and you'll get used to at least the key ones, because assassination and there's another one, sabotage, which is covered in the rules, and I think you'd probably want to photocopy that. Target a senator and play roll a die. On a 6, the target is killed. Okay, and there's some modifiers to add pluses and minuses to it. What's the sequence, though? How do you actually play this? And that's what I'm going to try to capture here. The rules, I think they give me an idea, but it's kind of hard to feel what it all comes down to. So the game is split into 3 phases. First, the Galactic Phase, which is largely a bookkeeping using the cards to draw events and etc. And what happens there, you get 3 random event cards, 3 sector cards for where their campaigns. Each player gets some action and senator cards. And then you roll 2 dice for an infestation. On a 10 or higher, the 3 cards that were turned over for sectors end up getting claws on them and helping towards whatever these Kira or Shira or something like that. So there's always a possibility that an infestation can occur. But the more corrupt players are, the more of these shadow tokens they have, and the flip side, I believe, is corruption tokens. So if you have 3 corruption tokens, you have to convert, well, every 3 corruption tokens you have can convert into a shadow token. The rules aren't absolutely specific about how these combine. In a lot of places, they seem to make it sound like if you count up all the corruption tokens and essentially divide by 3 and add that to the shadow tokens. That's what it sounds like for most events. There may be some cases, though, where it's only shadow tokens. So in terms of the key raw or whatever, you get to add the number of shadow tokens to the die roll. So as players become more corrupt, as their senators collect these corruption and shadow tokens, it becomes more and more likely that you're going to have infestations rather than regular political campaigns. And infestations are a problem, not just because, hey, the game's over when there's 10 of them on the board, but because you can't campaign in those provinces until they've been militarily defeated. Okay. And then you collect resources, and this is pretty much, you get, I believe it's 5 money for free every turn, plus whatever influence and money that your sectors produce. And the innermost sectors produce more money and influence than the outer sectors. And these over here, obviously, we saw before, have a lot of money on them. And that's the Galactic Phase. You're not allowed to play action cards during that. Action cards are divided into either into 3 types, either Senate, Intrigue, or General. The General cards can be played at any time within those 2 phases. The Senate and Intrigue cards are specific to their phases. Okay, so then we go to the Senate phase, and this is where the game kind of becomes a little too loosey-goosey for a lot of people's taste, I think. The first thing that happens is if you're on an election turn, and every 4th turn is an election turn, you hold elections first for the Prime Minister, and then for the other 4 ministries, in order. And the way an election works is you have a number of votes equal to the diplomacy value of your senators added together. Now, the diplomacy value of senators is reduced by shadow tokens. Each shadow token you have reduces their votes by 1. That can go negative. They can be so evil and that their party is tainted by it. A party's total senatorial vote, though, can't go below 0. There's only so much harm that being associated with someone evil can do to you. So even if you have a tremendously evil senator, or if all your senators are evil, all it means is that the other senators won't vote. And you'll have a total voting base of 0. Now, for any given vote, whenever you want, you can spend your influence points. Remember, you get these each turn as a commodity almost, to sway the Senate and to say, you know, I think I want 5 more votes in my favor. Normal voting rounds happen. The Prime Minister and the outgoing Prime Minister, in the terms of an election, will designate who's going to vote on a topic. The current topic, which is, you know, in front of the body, and that you're being picked in order, and you must cast your votes then. But you only have to cast your senators' votes. You have to cast all of them, or abstain. But if you abstain, you forego the right to cast those votes. But at any point, you can chime in with your influence points to effective voting. So it prevents the situation that was regular in a game we have up here somewhere as well, Republic of Rome, or Dysfunction of Rome. I've done the video on that already. There's a situation in that game where you can force people to vote early and either spend money and never spend a counter vote against it because it's too expensive at that point, or force them not to spend money because they don't have to, and be able to get a vote that would be otherwise going their way, rather cheaply by putting your own influence in. In this, that doesn't happen. In this, instead, every player has the right to throw their one-use influence points into the total. Now, these things kind of look like they slide around a little too much for my taste, but I guess that's just the nature of the beast. Okay. So, you vote for the Prime Minister first. Then, the new Prime Minister gets to select one of the other 4 offices, and you keep going around until all the offices are distributed. If one player gets all 5 of the positions, they win the game. So that's one route to victory, and probably other players are going to be pretty much against that. It's going to be very hard to not form coalition governments, I would assume, in this game. Deal making is pretty much anything at any time. Play stops in order for deals to be made, and counter offers can be made, etc. But you're pretty much allowed to trade whatever you like within the rules that are set by the players. And that's done through other voting. Now let's look what else we have. Now we vote on the Republic fleet. So a player can suggest that the fleet do something. In fact, there can be many suggestions that the fleet do something. All the players vote on those. If none of them pass, if none of them get the majority of the votes, going, yes, let's distribute the fleet this way, then the fleet remains where it is here in Sector 1. And the status is just defense. There are rules in the game as to how you can use things. And these are basically inviolable. And it's basically a set of almost like a Bill of Rights type thing. No sentient being shall be obliged to adhere or support any political party. It means the Senate cannot create resources or assign sectors. Fair enough. No sentient being can be deprived of their freedom or property unless indicted with indicted with due process in a court of law. The Senate can't remove resources or sectors from a party as the effect of that. All sentient beings are equal before the Republic. The Senate can't single out a party and pass laws to their benefit or otherwise. Any law has to be general, but it can be general along the lines of, we'll tax each province over 3 by $2, which could only harm one person, really. And you could really phrase things in a way that it's safe to really hurt someone, I think. Okay, and then being the key property of sentient life, freedom of choice is inviolate. Civil society demands the individual freedom be restricted, but nature forbids that it be extinguished. The Senate cannot change the rules of the game, nor can it eliminate a party's ability to campaign or play action cards. And some of this is really not just to preserve the game mechanics, but also to preserve the believability. I mean, if you forbid somebody to campaign, yeah, there have been times parties have been made illegal. And I guess that wouldn't be too terrible. But it would be an unfair advantage to single out the leader in that way, I think. And it would make the game probably unwinnable. That would be my take on it. Okay. So then, you vote on prosecutions. And the way this works is that people who have broken the laws of the Senate or have committed a crime that's specified already in the rules, although I guess the Senate could rescind those laws as well as adding its own. For example, illegally invading a province. Now that's really highlighted as this is illegal. You know, no matter what, you're kind of tainted by this. And no matter what, you're going to get shadow tokens from it. But you may also suffer a prosecution from it, which is actually, I'm not sure how it's handled. I think it's handled through a die roll. I remember seeing that somewhere. But basically, the players have to vote on whether or not to prosecute you. And then if you're prosecuted, I'm sure this is in here now. Are now rolled along with additional prosecutions. You know, I don't see this anywhere. Yeah. There's some. Oh, here we go. Here's a prosecution table at the end of the Senate phase. So you roll. So whoever proposed the prosecution has to pay 2 influence, and then they have to roll dice on here to see what the effect is. So you prosecute someone, you declare whether or not they're guilty, but then there's a chance that something happens. And I don't know what disgrace does. The disgrace, hold on, here we go. Fines are 5 money and disgrace is 1 corruption token on the minister. Ah, the minister, whoever proposes the prosecution is going to get disgraced from it. But if you get a high enough value, you end up removing people from office and causing a fine, execution. Now, that's targeted not at a player, but at a particular senator. And I'll load this one up, come back, because we have to finish this as well as get into the initiative or intrigue phase, where you actually get to do stuff on the board, not just cut deals. Okay, so we've made our way through the prosecutions at this point, and that table that I find here on the player aids doesn't seem to exist in anywhere else that I can find. It's not in the rules summary, it's not sitting here in the rule book itself. I find that a little disturbing. It means that the player aids are probably contain some other information, and they indeed do. For example, the costs of the different units is all listed here, as well as some of the military information may be on here that's not as well described in the rules. I guess it's okay, but you do have to be aware and look to the cards and to the components to understand what the game's going to be about. Okay, so now we look at propositions and votes. After players have determined where the Republic's fleet, I wanted to say Federation, but it's not, Republic's fleet is going to be disposed of, if at all. And honestly, the special power of the Minister of Defense allows him to override that at a cost of some some shadow points, or not shadow points, corruption points. He can decide to misuse the Republic fleet, essentially. But after that's decided and the prosecutions have been handled, we go on to players putting out specific propositions. All of them have to be put, and unfortunately the rules talk about tabling these motions. In a sense, that's true. They get tabled until all of them are present, and then you vote on them. But it gives, when you table something, it usually means we're not going to handle it anytime in the near future, right? And it's a bad choice of words for a game that's parliamentary in nature, because it gives the wrong impression there. But once you read the rules, it becomes fairly clear that when they say that, they mean just tabling it until the voting is going to occur. So all these propositions are suggested by players. Now, as far as I can tell, there's no cost to doing so. The only unlike prosecutions where there is a cost, there's only a cost to a prosecution if it's successful. That's another special power I didn't mention with the prosecutions. After the ones that players suggest are handled and vote on, the Minister of Justice is allowed to prosecute anyone, whether they're guilty of anything or not. He has to pay the price as well, though. Okay. and they just have to roll. Okay, so moving on to these rules, they give you, or new laws, they give you some suggestions about them, but basically you're allowed to do anything that's not illegal in the rules. You can raise taxes, you can set up, you know, an economic system, if you want, between the players, where you can't create new resources, but you can set it up so that players are forced to trade with some like non-existent little bank or something that you put off to the side. You can do anything that doesn't directly violate the rules, and that's very cool. I like games where you can do this. The closest that I can remember having this much latitude, or maybe hinting at it but not actually having it, is the Canadian Civil War, which I honestly, when I first read the rules, thought you could just change the rules by a majority vote of the Parliament. So you could essentially make Canada into a dictatorship or something, which I thought was incredibly cool. But in neither game are you allowed to do that. In fact, in Canadian Civil War, you're only able to handle rules disputes that way. In this game, though, you're allowed to add... another game that kind of allows that, I believe, is after the Holocaust. There's sort of an option to like allow players to create their own economies or such, not under their own rules. And also, this one over here, and this may be why I'm thinking of it, which is Crusoe's Planet. I'll be getting that at some point to table. That looks like a really, really cool abstraction of a lot of different economies so that you can investigate how they work in a very small scale. But this, well, you're allowed to set up, say, trading agreements that are enforceable between players. You can also make binding agreements just between players as well. So, for example, if one player agrees to pay another player 2 money every turn, they're bound to that. Now, being bound to an agreement doesn't mean you have to do it, but it does mean if you break it, and it only counts if you set it in front of everyone, if you end up breaking that agreement, you get some corruption, I think 2 corruption points on one of your senators. Okay. And corruption may not be a bad thing. It's kind of like the penalty in Pax Britannica up here, which is perhaps really to some countries' advantages to take. In this game, taking corruption, while it might affect the overall corruption of the galaxy and the chance of everyone losing, is actually kind of a nice thing to have, and I'll touch on that hopefully at some point. Okay, we go to the intrigue phase then. Now, each player has an order in which they do things, and I believe... no. I thought it was on these, on the cards themselves. And non-player effects also have a certain order. The order is listed here. So, for example, the Republic fleet and infestations go first. The Republic fleet's ordered by the players, infestations by the rules of the game itself. Then, a party that held no position, they had, no office, would go next, and then the various ministries, and you have to go first in that order. And the final player is the party in rebellion. If you hold rebellion card, you get to go last, which may be an advantage actually. Now, any argument over initiative is resolved with a roll-off, and the higher player wins that. Okay. And the order of this is, first, each player declares in order where they're going to move their fleets and whether or not their fleet is going to be attacking or invading, or it's just defending that province. If it's invading the province, well, that may be illegal. If you're invading a province that's not under the Kira or whatever they are, you're breaking the law, and you get some shadow tokens on the admiral leading the invasion, or if no admiral is leading it, one of your senators is charged with ordering that invasion and gets those penalty points. He's also eligible for a prosecution by the vote of the players. Remember, the Minister of Justice can just, convene a star chamber against you or something. Okay, and then you actually resolve the invasion. And we'll handle the combat in a moment. It's not too complicated, actually. Then you go to the other side, which is you can try to run a campaign. And in general, you can only run a campaign in 3 sectors that are turned up, and only if they're not infested. Okay, and that works very much like an invasion, except instead of actually sending your fleets in to fight, you send one of your senators in, and that taps him, as with leading a fleet, and he tries to persuade the people. In that case, you're able to use influence in order to modify the rolls. In both cases, the province itself has a base defense equal to this number. It gets a die roll also to defend itself. If it's an invasion, it gets its fleets. If it's not an invasion, it doesn't. It just gets, whatever influence is committed by other players. Okay, and so that's what you do there, campaign declarations and then the campaigns. And again, everybody does each one first. So each player declares their campaigns, and then all the campaigns are resolved. And then you're allowed to buy either fleets or senators. Buying fleets costs you 5 for party fleets, but only 3 for Republic fleets. Now, the government can choose to buy fleets as part of its action. The money's set aside for that and takes place in, I think now, I'm not sure, they may buy it actually during their phase, but as a player, you can buy the Republic fleets. They're not yours to control when you do that. You just donate money to the government to provide fleets. And they're fairly cheap. Now, if you buy your own fleets, they're a little more expensive. You're also allowed to trade money and influence back and forth at a 3-for-1 ratio. This is something that you can also, it's very clearly expressed, you can pass a law to change that ratio. Again, what you're allowed to pass laws on and not isn't absolutely clear. There is a set level, the Bill of Rights as it were, that you cannot violate. But when they suggest something that's written on the cards can be changed, you start to wonder, okay, just how much of these rules are really here and how many do you have freedom to change? I'm willing to deal with it either way, but the players are going to probably have to come to some sort of agreement about what the rules are, which isn't too bad. There aren't a lot of rules here. Okay, let's go into how some of these things are resolved then. So, if you're going into an actual fight, let's see how this works. So you can invade, and the way you do that, well, you actually have, somewhere we have it listed here. So the defender always wins ties, and on a roll of a 6, on any die, when you roll dice for either attack or defense, you roll again and add that next roll. But that's only once. You don't get a re-roll if you roll a second 6 after that. So now there's 2 different ways to do it. There's the invasion. And when you invade, you take 2 corruption if you're trying to take it by military force. And this is only if the area is not an infested area. You roll 1 die for each fleet in the combat, and the higher person with the total will win. In addition, every 5 and 6 you roll, and that includes on re-rolls, causes your opponent to lose a fleet. Now the defender gets 1 die plus the defensive value plus a die for each fleet. You also get your military bonus for whatever admirals you have there. And you also get a bonus of +1 for each adjacent sector that you control. Now, you can fly fleets anywhere. There's no movement restriction for this. Let's look at a campaign. If you use a campaign, like I said, you've got to tap a senator. The attacker and defender each get +1 for each adjacent sector they control. And if they have the party or race affiliation, or both, equal to the ones that the campaigner has. So the campaigner has a party affiliation in terms of he's with a certain party. It doesn't matter what he's aligned with, but he also has his own race, which makes him better able to deal. Now, you'll notice once we get in, there's no races for the central core of the galaxy, because those are such a mishmash that they don't have a real disposition towards one race or another, or towards one party or another. So that bonus won't be available as you go inward. Okay, and let's see, what else do we have here? Senator Commander's Diplomacy. Plus the influence that's spent on attacking, plus any bonuses which may come from, you know, cards or something, or abilities. And the defender gets the sector defense, and they also, if it's a player who's defending the province, if it's being taken away from someone, they're allowed to pay, geez, these keep moving, these are going to be hellish. They get to pay, let me slide these up a little bit, I guess, give me some more room, but they get to pay influence to defend their sector as well. Now, influence is a commodity. It's paid in the voting stage, it's paid here, sometimes it's paid to trigger effects, I guess. Alright, now, in order to do a campaign, I believe there's a restriction here. Multiple people are allowed to campaign for a sector at the same time. Something I noticed. The way that happens, each one is resolved separately in the sense that they roll their own dice. The highest roller is then compared to the defense of the sector, and they either win or lose by defeating the sector. But only the highest of the campaigners can win the sector, which isn't too shocking. The only way you can help one another really is in campaigning. You can give influence to someone. Of course, I guess you could play action cards to affect people. There doesn't appear to be a lot more than that to the game. It's a very simple base mechanic with all these cards and special effects. So that may be a problem for me because I have trouble keeping track of all that kind of stuff, right? But we'll see. Okay, let's go into how corruption works. So you can gain as much corruption as you like, but once you gain 5 or more, you have to take shadow tokens, and each corruption token gives you a +1 to your prosecution. Shadow tokens count as 3 for this. So your die roll for being prosecuted is going to be much easier against you if you're corrupt. It also reduces their diplomacy, as we explained already, which reduces their ability to campaign for that particular senator, but it also reduces the entire voting power of that faction. If you have negative, we already touched on this, the negative applies to your other senator's points with a minimum of 0 for the entire party. Now, we go some more here. Shadow tokens always count as 3 corruption tokens. Okay. Corruption can be traded in for shadow tokens at 3 per. Senators who have 5 or more must trade them in. And each shadow token you have, and this is what's interesting, for each shadow token, 3 corruption bonus, you get an extra die on anything you do. Now, one of those actions is an assassination where you have to roll a high number, a 6. Normally, you'd be adding those extra dice to a set of rolls. Like if you're campaigning, aha, man, I got 2 shadow tokens, I get all this. Now, granted, you get some minuses for that, right? Because your diplomacy is going to go down. But if you're corrupt enough, it'll pay off because you get more dice. I don't believe you can go down below 0 for that. Let's see how that's... Yeah, it doesn't say there. Yeah, I guess it would stay negative actually. So you would have a negative to your votes to your ability to sway things. So it might be kind of a weird twist because it takes 3 corruption to give you a die, and rolling a die is probably a little better than a 3. So once you get 3 corruption and you get that shadow token, you get an extra die at -3. But the average on the die is 3.5, so you get a slight bonus there. And 6s give you a reroll, so you get a bigger bonus than even that by a significant amount, actually. So it's probably to your advantage in campaigns to have corruption. Okay, but with the assassination, you just roll those dice and pick the highest one. Those extra dice just help you. That's it. That's all there is to this game. The rules seem deceptively simple right now. Reading the rule book, I walked away without a lot of confidence that I had a game here. Working through it slowly, looking at the components, seeing that everything really kind of is there and that there's more. I'm more convinced that I actually have a game here, but it's not like something, you know, it's probably very easy to explain this. Now, granted, I spent a lot of time explaining it, but I think once you're familiar with it, it's going to be a very, very simple game to explain because almost everything's right there in front of you at the table. The abilities on the cards, etc. Now, I don't know all of the abilities on these different positions. We'll be getting into them as I play. I don't know what the action deck's like. I don't know what the senators can do. That's going to be interesting. Certainly don't know what the events are. And it's going to be fun to explore the game in that fashion because it looks like a really simple system, but with a lot of power perhaps behind it. We'll see how well it plays out, though. Okay.